whole tariff policy is a mistake. I think we ought to go back to the way we were before. But leaving that aside, in the time of Trump in the White House, to get a deal that reduces the tariffs and leaves the way open for further negotiations, Trump is trying to climb down from the confrontation. Perhaps Modi as well. I think that's a good sign. But with Trump, that was the news last week. Who knows what the news next week will be?
Let's now move on to our other big guest on Global Pulse tonight. We are now joined by Ambassador John Bolton. In addition to having served as the US ambassador to the UN, he was President Donald Trump's national security advisor in the first term, a man who's very well regarded in strategic circles around the world. Ambassador Bolton, great to have you on Global Pulse.
Well, I'm glad to be with you.
So let me begin by asking you this. Now, US Chief Negotiator Brendan Lynch is in Delhi today. Talks were held, and we are given to understand that the talks were positive, and it's expected to be a precursor to the sixth round of trade negotiations that was stalled earlier thanks to Trump's punitive tariffs on India. In your view, are we likely to have an India-US trade deal by the end of the year?
Well, I certainly hope so. I know that one of the reasons that New Delhi was unhappy with Washington going back to August was that they felt that both sides were making progress in the negotiations and that a deal could be reached when suddenly in early August, Trump canceled the next round of discussions and just said he was going to go with a flat 25% tariff, which was quite high, higher than Pakistan, higher than Bangladesh, and that there was some evidence Trump was acting in bad faith. I don't know what motivated Trump to do it, but I think the answer is get the negotiations going again and see if the two sides can reach a deal. I think the whole tariff policy is a mistake. I think we ought to go back to the way we were before. But leaving that aside, in the time of Trump in the White House, to get a deal that reduces the tariffs and leaves the way open for further negotiations is the best thing to do. Let's see what the two sides can agree to and then go from there, at least on these, what I'll call the economic tariffs.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you this. Now, after weeks of friction between the two countries, last week, as you're aware, President Trump and Prime Minister Modi posted some conciliatory messages on social media expressing optimism about resolving outstanding issues. What did you make of it? Does it signal a significant thaw in ties after all the frostiness?
Sorry, I think we cut out there. Could you repeat the question?
Sure. What I was saying is that after weeks of friction between the two countries, we are finally witnessing a thaw after Prime Minister Modi and President Trump exchanged some conciliatory messages on social media last week. Do you believe that is a significant thaw after all the frostiness?
Well, I think it indicates that Trump is trying to climb down from the confrontation, perhaps Modi as well. I think that's a good sign. But, with Trump, that was the news last week. Who knows what the news next week will be? But I would still say both sides should take advantage of it. I think this question of the second phase of the tariffs, the 25% tariffs on India because of importing Russian oil and gas, has left India the kind of collateral damage to the problem that the U.S. and Europe are having with Russia over Ukraine. I'd rather find a different way to handle it than Trump did, but I think we need to reduce purchases of Russian oil and gas, and there are ways to do this to help transition India away from that in a way that's economically sound. I think it was incoherent of Trump to impose tariffs on India, but not impose sanctions or tariffs on Russia, which after all is the source of the problem, and certainly unfair not to sanction or tariff China, which has purchased a lot more oil and gas than India. So that is another issue that needs to be fixed. And if the two leaders are now closer to being able to talk about it again, then I think that's a good sign. I hope indicates progress.
Do you think there could be a phone call between the two leaders soon? And do you think that needs to happen?
Well, I would certainly think that needs to happen. There's conversation that Trump and Xi Jinping are going to talk on Friday, perhaps about TikTok.
Yeah.
which I think should be barred from the United States. I think I don't care what is played on TikTok. What I worry about is TikTok's intelligence gathering function for China. But I think it would be important for Trump to call Modi and say, look, I just want to report on the conversation I had with Xi Jinping, and then maybe move to bilateral subjects between the U.S. and India. I think we've got to rebuild the trust that existed. I do think Modi and Trump had a good personal relationship. For Trump, that's extremely important. So if we could do something to pull back from this split and the damage that's been caused, I think for the sake of both countries, it's important to try to do.
So, do you believe Trump will eventually withdraw his punitive tariffs on India? That's the question on everyone's mind. Isn't that necessary for normalization of ties? As you know, the tariffs, along with the unending nasty comments, have caused a lot of heartburn in India.
Yeah. Well, Trump isn't making it any easier. He's said in the past few days that he will not impose any additional American sanctions on Russia because of Ukraine, unless the European NATO members cut off their own purchases of Russian gasoline, like Turkey and some others, Hungary and one or two others, and that the Europeans should impose 50 or 100% tariffs on India and China. So this is the bigger problem is it's being.
Ambassador Bolton, can you hear me?
Yes, I think we cut off there again. Sorry.
Yes, we got cut off there, sir. So let me ask you that question. You just referred to it. On the one hand, Trump calls the India-US relationship a special relationship. On the other, not only has he slapped 50% tariffs on India, he's now demanding that the European Union slap up to 100% sanctions on India and China. Do you believe the EU will give in to pressure and follow suit? That could, of course, seriously jeopardize the imminent free trade agreement between India and the EU.
Yeah, I think it's very unlikely the EU will do that. Some people have speculated this is just another way for Trump to avoid sanctioning Russia. I mean, part of his problem is that his approach is incoherent. Russia is the problem. And the way the sanctions were written permitted India to do what it did. If the sanctions had been clearer that we don't want Russian oil purchased, then other solutions to the problem could have been found. So I think it's time to try and get Trump to think in global strategic terms, which he doesn't like to do. He usually only addresses the question right in front of his face. But this is very serious. And if you believe, as I do, that the main threat we're going to face in the 21st century is a China-Russia axis, that closer cooperation between the United States and India is critical, and with other countries, the Asian Security Quad that I hope India will continue to host later this year, with Japan and Australia coming in. These are times to have far-reaching discussions about how we can be mutually supportive and not be arguing with each other about tariffs.
Absolutely. I wanted to come to the subject of China and Russia and the Quad in just a moment. But before that, let me ask you this, Ambassador. Many in India believe that Trump acted against the country out of personal pique and vendetta over being denied credit for the ceasefire with Pakistan. Do you agree with that assessment?
Well, I think he's been on a campaign to get the Nobel Peace Prize. He said a few months ago he had stopped 6 wars in his first 6 months in office, including couple of wars nobody knew they were in, like between Serbia and Kosovo. It's been interesting. The Pakistanis apparently have now said that Trump's intervention had nothing to do with the de-escalation after the last terrorist attack in Kashmir, which is pretty remarkable, I think, pretty candid admission, and that it was India and Pakistan's leaders that drew the escalation circle downward. But this is Trump. It's not that he was picking on India. He just does this to everybody. That it's always about Donald Trump. He's the answer to whatever question you have. He's the answer.
Just today, it's interesting that while Trump goes on claiming credit for the ceasefire between India and Pakistan, India says that this was settled directly between the two countries with no involvement of a third party. Just today, Pakistan's Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Ishaq Dar, in an interview to Al Jazeera, has said that there was no third party involvement because India refuses any intervention and considers this to be a bilateral matter. How do you think Trump's claim of credit should be seen in view of the statement that has come from Pakistan today?
Well, as I said, I think it's pretty remarkable that they would say that, and certainly those who know a little bit about India know that from the similar agreements on forward, that's been the position that issues between Pakistan and India will be settled by the two of them. And so when it's an example of how little Trump knows about how much, and he's looking to take credit for things because he wants the Nobel Peace Prize. I can't tell you how serious and objective that is for him.
Okay. Sergio Gore, the Trump nominee for US ambassador to India, during his recent Senate confirmation hearing, was asked why the US has imposed secondary sanctions on India but not on China, the largest buyer of Russian oil. And his response was, we hold friends to different standards. Now, who's going to buy that? Nobody in India is flattered by that.
Yeah. Well, if you're going to hold friends to different standards, then it should be to put heavier sanctions on China. I think that the India-Russia relationship obviously has historical antecedents going back to the Cold War, but as Russia becomes more of a subordinate partner to China, which is the main threat, it seems to me inevitably India has to face the reality of distancing itself from Russia. Otherwise, it exposes itself more to China, and that's going to happen regardless of things like these tariffs. But by throwing obstacles in the way of closer cooperation, it's leaving us more vulnerable to the growing ties between Beijing and Moscow, and it's a very dangerous game.
Okay. Now, you said recently Sergio Gore is not fit to be ambassador to India. Why do you say that? And as Trump's man, what do you think his primary mandate will be? Indians are not thrilled about the fact that he will also be special envoy for South and Central Asia.
Well, I think that latter title is an indication that Trump just doesn't understand the historical reality on the subcontinent. And I don't know what Gore thinks that mandate means, but he has no background in the issues. He has little or no background in international affairs generally. It's true he will be very close to the president, but it's also true that if he can't tell the difference between bad information and good information, he could be a pipeline of very bad information to Trump too.
Now, Sergio Gore also told US lawmakers the US and India have a lot more in common than they have with Russia and China. If confirmed, I will ensure India is pulled in our direction, not away from us. Was the US rattled by the recent SEO summit and the coming together of India, Russia and China? Trump first said, we've lost India to deepest, darkest China. Later he said, no, we haven't lost India. There's nothing to worry about.
Well, that's typical Trump. Look, I think Prime Minister Modi sent a pretty clear signal of his dissatisfaction, but I don't think long-term India and China have much in common. And as I say, as Russia becomes more of a junior partner to China, India and Russia have less in common. So the direction of travel here is to closer cooperation with like-minded countries, Japan, Australia, the US, and others, hopefully Europe as well. And that's what we should be trying to work on. If Gore really puts his shoulder to the wheel and works on that, then fine. Maybe he will make progress.
Okay. Now, some say the optics of the SEO summit signaled that we're entering Cold War 2.0. And what Trump is doing is to isolate the United States and unite the rest of the world. Does that sound like an exaggeration, or do you believe that is indeed the case now?
Well, I wouldn't draw too many conclusions from just this one summit. It was clearly a propaganda exercise from the Chinese perspective from start to finish, legitimizing the role of the Chinese Communist Party in defeating Japan. U.S. sort of got left out of their version of how World War II ended in the Pacific, but it was also to project an image of China as stable and dependable, unlike the U.S. under Trump. So this is a long historical issue here, and I think we've got to look at the evidence and make our plans accordingly. But I don't think there's any doubt of China's hegemonic ambitions all along its Indo-Pacific periphery. No doubt about it.
Ambassador Bolton, what do you make of the unhinged tirades made against India by Trump's surrogates, especially Peter Navarro and Howard Lutnick?
Well, I think they say it because they think it appeals to Trump and makes them look tough. But it's dealing with that approach. India, I think, unfortunately, like a lot of other countries, should just grit its teeth and say we're not going to let personalities stand in the way of national interest. If we've got to put up with these kinds of people, that just goes with the territory. We've got to think about long term interest here and work on that and not worry about the sort of passing personalities.
Okay, I know you said recently that India should look at Trump as a one-time proposition. The trouble is we still have 3.5 years to go, and considering that he's caused so much damage in just his first 6 months in office, there is no telling how much worse things could get over the next 3.5 years.
Well, on Saturday it'll be 3 1/3 years, so time is actually moving pretty quickly here. And remember, in U.S. history, Trump is right now the only president who's both a new president and a lame duck president because he can't serve another term. And I think we're over what we call the honeymoon period in this term. I think people are now looking toward the midterm congressional elections in November of 2026. And then very soon after that, because political campaigning never ends, is the 2028 presidential election. So Trump is on the downhill part of the curve, and it will be time will begin to move faster. His lame duck status will become more apparent, and people will be talking about what comes after Trump. And so it's important to bear in mind that history doesn't end with Donald Trump. There's a long history after Donald Trump, and we should be focused on how to minimize the damage he'll do in the rest of his term, and then how to fix it once he's gone.